Hello and welcome. I'm Pratap Singh. You're joining us on NewsX World. Let's get started with our top stories. President Donald Trump of the United States of America has abruptly ended trade negotiations with Canada over its digital services tax on U.S. tech firms. He warned Ottawa will face new tariffs within a week, calling Canada very difficult to trade with. Israeli airstrikes and gunfire killed at least 23 people in Gaza on Saturday, including 3 children in a home in Jabalia, according to civil defense officials. 2 others were reportedly shot while waiting for food aid in central Gaza. Pope Leo XIV has welcomed Ukrainian Catholic pilgrims to St. Peter's Basilica, voicing sorrow for the war's victims and calling Ukraine a martyred nation. He received a Ukrainian flag and a book chronicling the ongoing conflict. Russia's defense ministry has released drone footage showing its forces raising the national flag in Chervona Zirka, eastern Ukraine. The video claims to confirm Moscow's control over the contested area. Iran has reopened its central and western airspace to international flights after a 12-day war with Israel. Forced closures. The skies were shut on 13th of June following Israeli airstrikes and Iranian missile retaliation. Canada has ordered Chinese surveillance giant Hikvision to cease operations over national security concerns following a multi-step intelligence review. Hikvision condemned the move, calling it biased and lacking transparency. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has called on lawmakers to prepare for a possible parliamentary dissolution, declaring confidence in a future government. Allies including Eric Ciotti and Jordan Bardella have signaled plans to challenge the government during the autumn budget debate. Tens of thousands marched in the Budapest Pride Parade, defying a government ban, seen as part of a broader crackdown on LGBTQ rights. The event, co-organized by the opposition-run City Hall, directly challenged Prime Minister Viktor Orban's nationalist policies. US President Donald Trump has abruptly cut off trade talks with Canada over its digital services tax on US tech firms, calling it a blatant attack. Moreover, Trump said he would introduce new tariffs on Canadian goods within the next week. Here's what the US president had to say.
Canada put a charge on some of our companies, and Canada's been a very difficult country to deal with over the years. We hear Canada, we have a great relationship with the people of Canada, but it's been very difficult, and they put a charge, and they were a little bit early. We found out about it. And we have all the cards. We have every single one. We don't want to do anything bad.
The move throws US-Canada relations back into chaos after a calm period, including a recent G7 meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. The tax, which targets companies like Amazon, Meta, and Google, is a 3% levy on digital revenue, above $20 million from Canadian users. Trump announced the termination of all trade discussions with Canada until the tax is reversed, calling Canada a difficult country to trade with. Canada responded, saying it would continue engaging in negotiations. Meanwhile, U.S. talks were temporarily impacted by the news but have since recovered. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the government could retaliate against Canada and other countries with similar taxes. Joining us at this point is Ruben Johnson, Director, Asia Research Center at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation. He's live with us from Warsaw in Poland. Thank you for being with us today on NewsX World, Ruben. Let me begin by asking you about this latest hiccup in US-Canada trade talks. What do you make of it?
I don't see a positive outcome from this. I mean, Trump is a businessman, and he's always looking for a resolution that has a plus at the end of it, but I don't see it for this one. I mean, Canada is America's largest trading partner, and it's not just the problem with the digital tax, which supposedly it would cost Amazon, Google, and these tech companies in the U.S. another $2 billion per year, but it creates huge problems for a big example is the automotive industry, which is finally getting back to recovery after what happened during COVID. because of the way we build automobiles, automobile parts are made in different parts of the Americas, and then they are shipped to final assembly points. And because of the manner in which those supply chains are set up, these parts cross the borders between the U.S. and Mexico, U.S. and Canada several times. And I think this could become a financial and a logistical nightmare and could cause a lot of harm to this industry.
Yes, absolutely. Ruben, also, as far as these new taxes are concerned, do you believe other countries could also be impacted by them? We're learning that the markets also reacted pretty sharply to this development, although they have kind of recovered now.
Well, all of these things are now interconnected. I mean, what did we learn during COVID? We learned during COVID that a lot of the piece parts and components that we need to build, I'll go back to automobiles, that we need to build automobiles come from China. And you had production lines shutting down because the majority of the wiring harnesses made for many vehicles in the world were made by factories in China. So yes, everyone ends up being impacted because we're in a global economy where everyone is connected to everyone else.
Absolutely. Also now, Ruben, as far as the US-Canada trade talks are concerned, do you believe they can recover from this, fresh blip? Or do you believe Donald Trump's latest statements will have a far more severe impact on US-Canada relations going ahead?
I'm afraid, unless this is just a move to try to stake out a position, a bargaining position, so that they can go back to the table and discuss within a short period of time. But if this turns into a protracted situation, this could have all kinds of effects that we don't want it to have. Canada is a major customer, or has been committed to be a major customer for the American F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. They could rescind their decision if this goes on, and they could decide to start sourcing military aircraft from someone else. So that's just one example of many things that could go wrong if this turns into a prolonged dispute.
All right, we're getting some more big news coming in this hour. In fact, now Pope Leo XIV has welcomed pilgrims of the Ukrainian Catholic Church to St. Peter's Basilica, offering powerful words of comfort and solidarity amidst the ongoing war in Ukraine. Walking alongside Major Archbishop Shevchuk, the Pope acknowledged the suffering of Ukraine's people, calling them martyred, and questioning the senseless violence of the war. Let's listen into a part of his address.
Sorelle e fratelli, accogliendovi qui, desidero esprimere la mia vicinanza alla martoriata Ucraina, ai bambini, ai giovani, agli anziani e in modo particolare alle famiglie che piangono i propri cari. Condivido il vostro dolore per i prigionieri e le vittime di questa guerra insensata. Affido al Signore le vostre intenzioni, le vostre.
Well, during the emotional gathering, Pope Leo was presented with a Ukrainian flag and a book titled Chronicle of a Sacrilegious War. Popes across history have shaped the Church's voice on social issues through both words and action. From Pope Leo the 13th's defense of workers' rights in Rerum Novarum to Pope John Paul II's push for human rights and Pope Francis's global advocacy on justice and the environment, each pontiff has left a distinct moral legacy rooted in the Church's responsibility to stand with the vulnerable. Ruben Johnson is live with us on this big story, Director Asia Research Center at the Casimir Pulaski Foundation. He's live with us, in fact, from Warsaw, Poland. Ruben, how do you view this address by the Pope and his messaging on this occasion?
Well, I lived 21 years in Ukraine, and I saw the progress of the country over that time. and I almost died in the invasion. And I've seen what Russia has done to this country that represented absolutely no threat to Russia whatsoever. It did represent a threat to President Vladimir Putin because his people would look across the border and see that a former Soviet republic, which had a democratically elected government, was improving by the day, and that Russia was getting worse by the day. And it was a threat to him. It was a threat to his position, a threat to his rule, that his people would someday demand a similar type of governing apparatus. But what's been done to Ukraine is absolutely, it's beyond barbaric. There is a long piece in the New York Times today about what happens to different Ukrainian communities when they are attacked by these Shahid drones, which came from Iran and which are now produced in Russia. And I can only say that here in Poland, this is where John Paul II came from. You mentioned him. Here in Poland, we miss John Paul II because I'm quite confident if he was the Pope, his statements about Russia would be very strong, and he would be working night and day to try to do what he did to the communist regime in his time, which is to bring this government down. This current Russian government has no place in a civilized world.
Yes, Ruben, also, of course, you know, if we talk now about this gesture also of welcoming pilgrims of the Ukrainian Catholic Church there to the Vatican, what does it really say about the Pope's, you know, outreach? Every Pope has tried to leave, you know, their own imprint on a peace overture, or, of course, their own, you know, sort of attempt to heal wounds. That's perhaps something that the Pope has attempted through this move, isn't it? Do you believe it's a very good move to you know, have so many members of the Ukraine Catholic Church at the Vatican?
I think it's a very good move to have so many members of the Ukraine Catholic Church, and I can tell you that one of the largest Catholic churches in Kiev, which was right next door to the music school where my son used to learn piano, was heavily damaged by the Russians. I mean, it's one of those, I believe I'm correct when I say it's one of those UNESCO world landmarks. So the Pope, I believe, is reaching out in this manner because if you remember, he made a previous attempt, he made an offer at becoming a mediator of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And he was rejected by the Russians because they said, oh, it was inappropriate because he's Catholic and Russia and Ukraine are Orthodox Christian countries. And I found that an astounding, I mean, another example of how Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is just absolutely useless as a representative for his country now. But so I believe this is his way of trying to interject himself into the dialogue, since Russia refuses to allow him to act as a mediator.
All right, Ruben Johnson, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on that story. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump has said a ceasefire in Gaza conflict could be reached within a week. Speaking at the White House, Trump told reporters he had spoken with individuals involved in ongoing efforts to halt hostilities between Israel and Hamas. Let's in fact listen in to Trump's comments.
Often asked, and I think it's close. I just spoke with some of the people involved. It's a terrible situation that's going Gaza. He's asking about, and we think within the next week we're going to get a ceasefire. And we're supplying, as you know, a lot of money and a lot of food to that area because we have to. I mean, you have to.
The comments come despite little visible progress in negotiations and entrenched positions on both sides. Meanwhile, Palestinian health officials report that at least 49 people were killed across Gaza in Israeli air and ground strikes. Amongst the dead were 31 civilians, reportedly seeking food near aid distribution sites, including in the Netzarim corridor, an Israeli-controlled zone where fatal incidents have become frequent. Additional casualties were reported in Gaza City, Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis as aid access remains limited and hunger deepens across the strip. Let's listen in to what some of the eyewitnesses had to say.
حالنا او في الخيم هنا ما شفنا الا المغربيات اللي صواريخ اف 16 بتنزل علينا قاعده ضربوا الشارع وبتنزل علينا يعني الفلسطيني العربي الفلسطيني بندفن مره واحده في لما بموت احنا بندفن مرتين بنموت مرتين بندفن احياء وبندفن اموات يعني احنا طلت اولادي من تحت الردم من تحت الرمل طلت شارع حالنا او في الخيم هنا ما شفنا الا المغربيات اللي صواريخ اف 16 بتنزل علينا قاعده ضربوا الشارع وبتنزل علينا يعني الفلسطيني العربي الفلسطيني بندفن مره واحده في لما بموت احنا بندفن مرتين بنموت مرتين بندفن احياء وبندفن اموات يعني احنا طلت اولادي من تحت الردم من تحت الرمل طلتهم انا.
Peter Baum, foreign editor, Weekly Blitz, is joining us live from London. Peter, what do you make of the United States President's latest comments on the conflict in Gaza? Do you believe it is an indication that there could be a truce soon?
Good evening to you and your viewers, and thanks for having me on. You know, before coming on to your esteemed programme, I always do my homework before coming to an analysis. And I spent the last couple of hours talking to sources in Israel, in the USA, and in Egypt. And I would suggest that all well-informed sources. So I can give your viewers and listeners what I think is the most up-to-date analysis of where the Trump administration are. As far as I understand it, within the next 2-week period, 4 Arab nations will start to take control as a sort of a mandate, a quasi-mandate style operation in Gaza. Hamas will not have any political or military input to the, if this plan comes to fruition, to the future destination of Gazans. And one of the reasons for this is because Hamas not only has been weakened dramatically by the nearly 2 years of armed conflict with Israel, but now that there are dissenting voices within Hamas, and also Arab family clans in Gaza are now vying with Hamas for military control. There is fighting going on, gunfights going on between family clans and Hamas. So the Trump plan is, having seen Hamas at its weakest ever since it began to have control in Gaza in at the beginning of this century, 2008, let's say, has been weakened to such an extent that those 4 Arab nations, among them Egypt, Jordan, Syria and Saudi, I believe, will start to have full control. And what is more interesting, and again, these come from sources that I've just spoken to recently, it is hoped, but not yet endorsed or rubber stamped by any means, that it is hoped that both Syria and Saudi, if this plan comes to fruition, will join the Abraham Accords as part of Trump's negotiation process.
Okay, but Peter, amidst that, of course, these these incidents continue of violence in Gaza. These incidents continue of strikes within Gaza. Also, what is pretty concerning is the fact that a lot of this happens close to where the aid is being distributed.
You're absolutely correct, and it's a very good point that you've actually raised it. But can I just give you again the most up-to-date information that I have about this? You will see every day of the week now, and have seen for the last 2 or 3 weeks, reports coming out of Palestinians being killed by Israeli troops at these aid distribution centres. I can assure your viewers and listeners that 99% of such deaths have been caused by Hamas themselves and those clans opposing Hamas. It has not been the Israeli, the IDF, that has been firing on the Palestinians. Now, you quoted earlier on, you cited sources from the Palestinian Health Ministry as being the information source that you, understandably, and the rest of the world's media has been gaining to cite these unfortunate Palestinian deaths. The Palestinian Health Authority acts to the Hamas as Joseph Goebbels did to the Nazis. They are simply a propaganda wing of Hamas. So one cannot believe anything they say, whether it's a number of deaths in hospitals, a number of functioning hospitals not working, the starvation, the genocide, etc., etc. The Hamas Health Ministry are just a propaganda arm. What is more interesting is the statements coming out from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Now, people believe that because an Israeli newspaper is citing similar to the Palestinian Health Ministry, oh, it must be true. But let me just give you an understanding of what Haaretz, this Israeli daily newspaper, is all about. It is a rabidly anti-Netanyahu publication with a circulation of less than 1% of the Israeli population, growing to just under 1% at weekends when its circulation is higher. And it is also, as I'm sure some of Israel's friends in India will know, a rabidly hostile magazine to Modi. If you just Google the first 5 articles that Haaretz have about Israel-India relations, it's frankly disgusting. They accuse Modi of being acting like Hitler in the 1930s. They accuse Israel of grovelling up to a rabidly right-wing Indian government. They accuse Modi of being very anti-Muslim an Indian nationalist to such an extent that it's absurd. So the two sources of information, going back to your question, your very good question about deaths in Gaza,
yes,
and quoting the Hamas Ministry
yes.
of Health, and I'm quoting that and Haaretz as well, pure propaganda.
Okay.
The deaths are originating from Hamas and the Arab clans within Gaza themselves.
Okay, let me ask you then about the negotiations on the release of the hostages. What's the next stage on those negotiations now really going to be in the next days ahead? Because obviously Israel right now was concentrating on the conflict in Iran. Now with the tensions shifting back to Gaza, although this conflict of course had not ended at all at that point, do you believe we could see some progress in the negotiations between them and Hamas in the next few days? Or does that look like a distant possibility?
Okay, again, I've been fortunate enough to appear on your channel many times, as I have many other media channels globally. And for months now, we've been talking about progress talks regarding the hostages. I think Israeli society have come to the conclusion that if there are any hostages alive, and they believe that there are 20 alive, that those hostages could have and should have been released months ago if Hamas were serious about releasing them. But they're not. Hamas still believe that their best bargaining chip is hanging on to the hostages and gaining global media sympathy whilst Israel carries on a military campaign against them. So unfortunately, I've came to this conclusion some months ago that there will be very little progress with regards to releasing the hostages. Even Donald Trump, with all his power and negotiating skills, have not managed to budge Hamas. And Iran, which is probably the one nation that could help in these negotiations, is adamant that she will not get involved and let Hamas do. Iran has no control over Hamas anymore, such is the Iranians' position being so weakened. So Hamas is holding all the aces in this, although she herself is dramatically weakened. But I really do fear how many hostages actually remain alive.
All right, Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining us with your perspective on that story. And that's all the time we have on today's broadcast of World Report. We will continue to bring you more news and updates from around the world right here on NewsX World. Thanks for the time being with us.